Welcome. We are so pleased to have you all back for this afternoon session. And again, I'm Gabby Salzberger, and just want to say again that this is really part of a set of conversations that we are having with regard to investing in opportunities in Africa. And I wanted to point out there's also an app that we have developed that's part of this broader community. And so we're really encouraging all of you to make sure that you put your information on the app, because there will be more activities and more engagement, and we want to create other opportunities for people to connect even beyond this individual session. So with that, I am going to introduce our next incredible panel. It's going to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges of investing in Africa today. And that is led by our moderator, Richard Okelo, who is the co-founder of Sango Capital. So thank you very much, Richard. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gabby. I'd like to thank the Her Royal Highness for setting up this event. And just to take a quick second, you know, I'm not an avid social media fan. I don't hardly post, but I felt compelled to post this particular picture of the Qatar Africa Forum as sort of the first of its kind, and I think an important marker of the evolving relationship between this region and Africa and the importance of that relationship. So just want to thank you for enabling that, and obviously thank the organizers. To quickly introduce the panels, as Gabby said, I'm Richard Okelo. I founded a business called Sango Capital. So my orientation to this panel is really as a private equity or alternative investor. To my right, we have Mr. Okey Enelamah. He used to be a Minister of Trade and Industry in Nigeria, but he's also a private investor, has been one for a while, the chairman of African Capital Alliance. And I'd also then like to introduce Philip, who is a co-founder of Amaya Capital. I think a good place to start is the theme of the conference is around you know, the transformation to a new era. And before we get to that, I think it would be good to get your reactions, Okey and Philip, as you think back to the last couple of years. You know, obviously Africa's gone through COVID, as has the rest of the world. What has been most surprising for you, good or bad, most surprising for you about the evolution of the countries that your firms focus on? Let's start with you, Okey.
Thank you, Richard. So let me join the other speakers in also appreciating and thanking Her Royal Highness and all the other organizers for putting Africa on the map. We don't take it for granted. I note particularly that this is the first time we're featuring on this forum or on this platform, and it's good to be here. Thank you. The way I like to think about our question, Richard, is what I call the challenge of opportunity. You know, and you could even call it opportunities and challenges. How people respond to those things you don't necessarily always expect in life, but inevitably they happen. You know, whether it's COVID or the Russian-Ukrainian situation today, you know, these are challenges that people have responded to in very different ways. Let me deal with the positive. I've been positively surprised by the response of our youth, you know, and our growing population. Just the innovation when pushed by adversity, when pushed by what, even on the face of it, you might think is a bit of lack of opportunity. Some of the responses we've seen and some of the results coming through are pretty interesting. You know, whether it's in technology or entertainment or movies or sports, you know, and I think even some of the, we're talking about some of the responses in terms of the NSAS thing that happened in our country where the youth was demanding better governance. I think those things portend well, you know, properly harvested, and I'm glad that we're getting the right response in terms of, you know, some of the investments coming through into our markets, you know. And this response has been so interesting that some of us who consider ourselves, yeah, thank you. Welcome, Your Excellency. Yeah, thank you. Some of us who consider ourselves the older generation are having to respond to these opportunities and following the lead. But the flip side of that is I've also been negatively should I say, concerned, even surprised negatively by just how ill-prepared we are for some of the things that are going on around us. I mean, you and I were having discussion around, to use my home country, Nigeria, as an example. It's interesting that in the energy transition discussion earlier, there was talk about the low investment into the energy sector. But, we're a prime example of that. And as a result, you find that the response, to the world's need for energy, which is an area where we should feature prominently, our response has been subdued, in a very significant way. And this has all kinds of implications, and I hope, as we talk about it more, that out of it will come some opportunities looking ahead.
Thank you, Okey. Philip, just before you jump in, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our fourth panelist, His Excellency the Prime Minister of Mali. Welcome. He will be giving a speech at the end of the panel, so we'll reserve some time for that, but just wanted to acknowledge you, Mr. Prime Minister. Philip, if you want to jump in on that question, give us your quick thoughts.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to echo Okey and Enelamah's thanks to Your Royal Highness, but also to the government of Qatar generally for the very, very warm extension of a hand of friendship towards Africa. It's great to be coming to this part of the world, and we hope that this is the beginning of a new journey. It's funny to be speaking after Okey, who I've known now for 27 years. Okay, can you believe that? So we would, I guess, qualify as the old men of investing in Africa, doing it for over 25 years. So the last 2 years, I would say, is just a twinkle in the ocean. I think the main thing I would say about the surprise, especially the last few years for me, is if you look at what's happened with the challenges thrown up by COVID, you look at what's happened in Nigeria in particular, where we've had severe macroeconomic difficulties up until recently, with the oil prices being low, with much lower production of hydrocarbons than before. So the situation has been tough on a macro side. And what has surprised me in Nigeria, but also in Kenya, where I spend a lot of time, is the youth and the vibrancy, in particular, of the tech sector. What we have started to see very quickly is there's one large segment of the population and the market in Africa generally, especially sub-Saharan Africa, which is the, let's say, the unbanked or the informal sector. And that sector has been for many, many years ignored. And what tech has allowed to happen is for that sector to now become the target sector for services, from financial services to inventory management to logistics. And seeing that is something that has, and seeing the growth of that, we've been fortunate in that we've put a little bit of money in one of these companies and wish we had put a lot more. And just seeing the extraordinary growth of a business that is really serving a sector that has never been served before has been extraordinary.
Thank you, Philip. The world is going through a fairly unprecedented period of risk and volatility, and I think maybe to pivot the conversation, I'll ask you this question, Mr. Prime Minister. Your own country is going through transition. It obviously has a few security challenges, but I want to try to put that within the context of this panel, which is, how should people in this room think about opportunity and risk? And if I think about Mali, and I think about where you are right now, if you look back, as recently as, let's say, 2016, Mali was growing quickly. It's growing at 7% a year. So as you think about your country now and the opportunity that's afforded by this transition, what are the risks that you're most worried about? And what are the risks that perhaps people in this room might be worried about that to you are not very significant risk, where the perception of risk is not as high as the reality?
Merci bien.
Thank you very much.
Je voudrais commencer par
I would like to
saluer
start by
et remercier les autorités qatariennes
thanking the
pour
Qatari
l'accueil
authorities for
chaleureux
their
et fraternel dont
warm
notre délégation
welcome
a bénéficié depuis que nous
that
sommes
our
arrivés au Qatar.
delegation has benefited from since we have arrived in Qatar.
Pour moi, c'est un grand honneur
For me, it is
de
an
participer
honor
à ce forum
to take part in this
à
forum.
plusieurs titres.
On
D'abord, c'est un forum qui se tient
many
dans un pays ami.
levels. First of all, this is a forum that is
Et
organized in a friendly country,
Nous venons d'un pays qui est en crise
and
profonde,
we are coming from
une
a
crise sécuritaire,
country where there is a deep
crise
crisis, a security
institutionnelle,
crisis, an
une
institutional
crise
one,
politique,
a political crisis
une
as
crise
well,
humanitaire
and a humanitarian
et bien entendu
crisis, and of
une crise
course
sanitaire liée à la
a
Covid.
sanitarian
ressent.
crisis, a health crisis that everybody is going through.
La situation au Mali aujourd'hui
The current situation in
prometteuse à plus
Mali
d'un titre.
is
Vous savez qu'il y a quelques années,
deep.
on avait
You
le
know,
terrorisme qui était
for
confiné dans
quite
le nord
some
du Mali.
years we had terrorism
Nous avons eu des forces internationales,
in the north of our country. We had
La
international forces,
la
MINUSMA,
force Barkhane, c'est une
the
force française,
French
la
troops,
coalition des pays
Barkhane,
du G5 Sahel,
and the
d'autres
G5
forces
Sahel
qu'on appelle
forces,
Takuba, une
and
force
we had
internationale,
also international forces that
plus,
we call Takuba,
des forces liées à la formation
and other forces
venues de
linked
l'Union
to
européenne.
the EU.
On avait la MINUSMA, Barkhane,
And
Takuba,
we had
G5 Sahel,
Barkhane, Takuma,
et UTEM,
G5
et
Sahel,
CAP,
ITEM,
plus
CAP,
l'armée
plus
malienne, près de
the
50 000
million
militaires sur le
troops,
terrain malien.
more than 50,000 troops
Et
in
malgré
Mali.
tout, le terrorisme prenait de plus en plus d'ampleur sur le
Even though
territoire.
we had all these
On est allé
troops,
de
terrorism
à peu près 10% du
was
territoire qui était occupé
prolific
par les
in
terroristes en
the
2013.
north. We had many
On s'est
attacks
retrouvé à près
in
de
2013.
80% du
We
territoire
had
occupé par
90%
les
of our
terroristes,
territory
avec des
controlled
tueries
by
massives
the
dans les
terrorists
villages, des femmes, des
and
enfants brûlés.
all their
Et
terrorist
donc,
acts in villages and killing women and children.
peuple
So the
s'est soulevé en réalité
people
pour dire que le gouvernement qui
actually
ne peut pas assurer sa sécurité ne peut pas continuer à le
took
diriger.
to the
C'est
streets
ainsi qu'à
and
l'issue d'un soulèvement
said
populaire,
that
il y a eu un
this cannot
changement de régime.
continue. And then there was a
Le nouveau
change
pouvoir,
in the
dès qu'il s'est installé,
regime. So since
posé la
the
question
first day
suivante.
of the new
Est-ce qu'on
authority,
doit continuer
the
avec la
question
même
was
stratégie
asked,
de lutte
will
contre
we
le
follow
terrorisme
the
ou il
same
faut changer?
strategy to fight terrorism?
Et la
And
décision a été prise
the question
de
was,
changer
no,
en
we
quoi
had
faisant?
to
En
change our
diversifiant les
strategy
partenaires.
and diversify our partners in our
Parce que
fight.
jusqu'ici, et
Because
ça c'est
up
important à
until
souligner,
today, and
les
this
forces
is
internationales
important
qui
to
étaient au
underline,
Mali
the international
étaient
forces
toutes
that
dirigées
were in Mali
soit
were
directement
managed
par
directly
l'état-major militaire français
by the
ou par des Français,
French
même s'ils sont sous le couvert de la communauté internationale.
army or by the French in general,
Et donc, nous
because
avons
they were
décidé de
under the
diversifier les
umbrella of
partenaires.
international troops. That's why we have
Le
decided
résultat, c'est
to
qu'aujourd'hui,
diversify our partners. And the result is
Notre
that
armée est en train de monter
today
en puissance.
our army is
Toute
getting
la partie ouest du
stronger.
territoire
All
est
the
libérée
west
des terroristes.
Mali is liberated from terrorists.
Jusqu'à décembre
Until
2021,
December
on a
2021,
enregistré des
we
flux de
have
réfugiés.
and
On est arrivé
registered
jusqu'à
a flow
350 000
of
réfugiés.
refugees. We
À la
had
date
over
d'aujourd'hui, il y a déjà
50,000.
50 000
So
réfugiés
today
en moins de
we
3 mois
have
qui ont regagné leur terroir.
50,000 of them
Et nous
that
sommes en train de
went back
conquérir
to
le
their
territoire.
villages, and we are
Nous avons
actually
éliminé plus de
reconquering
nids
the
de
territory.
terroristes.
We have
Les
eliminated
chefs terroristes,
many safe havens
attrapé
of
certains qui sont
terrorists. We
détenus
have killed some
en 2 mois plus que les
terrorists
9
and
dernières années
their
réunies. parallèlement à ce
and we
succès,
have detained
il y
many
a le
of them as
problème
well.
institutionnel, le retour à
In
l'ordre
parallel with this
constitutionnel.
success, we
La
have
communauté
the
internationale dit
constitutional
organiser les
matter,
élections le plus
and the
rapidement
international
possible
community is
pour mettre
asking
un
Mali to
pouvoir
organize
légitime,
the
entre
general
guillemets.
elections to have a
Le
certain
gouvernement dit
legitimacy,
attention,
and the government said, well,
lorsque vous avez
hold on,
80% du
when
territoire
you have
occupé par les
80%
terroristes, il
of
n'est
the
pas
territory that is
possible
controlled by
d'organiser des
terrorists, it
élections.
is not possible
Donc
to
la
organize
première
any
priorité,
elections. So the first
c'est de
phase
retour de la
is
paix,
to gain
le retour des
or regain
réfugiés
peace, the return
et
of
l'organisation des élections.
refugees, and then we can organize
Il y a une
our
grande consultation
elections. There
nationale,
is a big
des débats auxquels ont participé
and
toutes les populations, plus de 90 000
negotiations and
participants au
debates,
débat.
and we had more than
La conclusion, c'est que
40,000
les Maliens ont
of
décidé de faire une transition politique de 5 ans.
Malians that are
Rétablir la
taking
paix,
part
les
in these
réfugiés, rétablir
negotiations
l'équilibre économique,
to actually
rétablir les services
look
sociaux
into
de base
the
et aller à des
economy,
élections.
to the services,
À
to the
l'issue des négociations
institutions
avec
before
la communauté
getting to
internationale,
the
il y a une
elections.
semaine,
With the efforts of the international
le gouvernement
community,
malien a dit
a few weeks ago,
qu'il n'est pas
the
possible,
Malian government said that
en
it is not
deçà de 2 ans,
possible
de 24 mois,
that in
d'organiser
less
des
than
élections.
2 years and
Donc, de
some
5
months, and
ans
a couple of
proposés
months
par
to
la
organize
population, le gouvernement, dans les négociations
an
avec la
election.
communauté
So we
internationale,
said that
propose
we
2 ans,
need 5 years at
dans
least,
l'espoir
but
que
the
dans 1
international
an,
community is
nous pouvons
proposing
rétablir la paix.
2 years. So we
Et
need
1 an
to
sera consacré
establish
au
peace
retour de
first,
l'État,
and we will
des services sociaux de
then
base et l'organisation des
work
élections.
on setting up the
Voilà la situation
services and the institutions.
Ce qu'il
This
faut
is the
retenir,
current situation. What
c'est
we
que la
have to
partie
remember is
où
that
est concentré les 80% de l'économie
where
est
80%
aujourd'hui
of
libéré.
the economy is located
Dans
is
cette partie,
liberated
vous
today.
avez
So in this
les mines
part
d'or,
over Mali, you have gold mines,
puis de gaz,
you have gas,
vous avez beaucoup de minerais, et c'est là que vous avez
and
les 2
other
plus grands
minerals,
fleuves
and there
de l'Afrique de
there is
l'Ouest,
where you
le
have
fleuve
the
Niger et le
biggest
fleuve Sénégal.
rivers,
Vous
the
avez plus de 3
Senegal
millions d'hectares
river, and we have 3 million
qui sont potentiellement
hectares that are
aménageables,
potentially that can be
sur
potentially
lesquels
used for
on a moins
agriculture,
de
on
300 000 qui sont aménagés.
where we
Donc, il y a
have
de l'espace.
more than 300 and
Le bétail
1,000 that
malien,
are ready.
du point de vue de
The
l'élevage,
livestock in
c'est le
Mali
plus grand cheptel
is
après le
one of
Nigeria.
the biggest
Il y a un
after
potentiel.
Nigeria's. So
Le
there
Mali est le
is
deuxième
a
producteur d'or en
potential.
Afrique de l'Ouest.
Mali is the second gold
Le premier
producer in
producteur
West
de
Africa,
coton
the first
en
producer of
au
cotton
sud du Sahara.
in sub-Saharan
Et ce
Africa.
coton est exporté presque à
And this cotton is
98%. Donc il y a
exported
du
to
potentiel pour
to
installer des usines,
98%
créer de la
of this
valeur
cotton
ajoutée.
is exported.
Nous avons
So
un
there is
déficit
an added
énergétique
value. We
important.
have a
Donc,
energy
il y a
deficit,
de
which is very
l'espace
important. So there is
pour les
space
investisseurs étrangers qui
for
veulent investir
foreign
dans l'énergie,
investors who
dans
want
les
to
routes,
invest in energy,
dans l'agriculture,
in
dans
road
l'agro-industrie, dans la
agriculture,
transformation du coton.
and in food.
En un mot,
So
les conditions
upstream, the
sont
conditions
réunies, les conditions
are
physiques.
the physical
Du point de vue de
conditions
la
are
législation,
there.
le code des investissements maliens
When
est
it
l'un
comes
des
to
plus
the
attractifs.
legislations, I think that
Vous
we
pouvez
are
installer
very
votre
attractive.
entreprise
So you
100%.
can establish your
Ou si vous voulez,
company
vous mettez avec des Maliens.
wherever
Vous pouvez
you
rapatrier les
want,
100% de vos
and you
bénéfices.
can
Vous avez la totale liberté de mouvement. Et nous sommes dans un espace communautaire
use 50%
de
of
près
your
de
benefits and take it
350
abroad.
000
We have more than
consommateurs.
350,000
Avec la libre
consumers
circulation
with
des
the
personnes et
free
des biens.
circulation.
Donc un investisseur qui
Is
s'installe au
very
Mali
good. So a foreigner
peut rayonner
who
sur toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest
is relocated
en couvrant
in
près de
Mali.
350 000 consommateurs.
So he
La
will
population
be
malienne
sure
elle-même est évaluée à 20
of
millions d'habitants.
attracting more than
Voici les conditions, me semble-t-il,
300,000 consumers. So I think
qui
the
doivent
conditions
inciter
are suitable
les
for
partenaires
investments,
privés
and we would like to
et notamment nos
actually
amis
attract
du
private
Qatar
investors and our friends
à
in the
s'intéresser
state of Qatar
au
to
Mali,
get interested in
à
Mali
nos amis des pays
and
du
our
Golfe,
friends in the
des
Gulf
pays du
region
Moyen-Orient, parce que
and the countries
les
in the
partenaires
Middle East,
naturels du
because
Mali historiquement,
um,
ce sont les pays
the
du Golfe, les pays arabes, les pays de l'Afrique
normal
du Nord,
partners of Mali
Naturellement,
are
en
the
plus
countries of
des
the
partenaires en
Middle
Afrique
East
de l'Ouest.
and the
Et vous avez
MENA
la
region
zone de
in general.
libre-échange
So
africaine
we have also
qui est
the
prévue cette fois-ci pour toute l'Afrique.
free
Ce qui fait que ceux qui s'installent au Mali
zone.
avec leurs entreprises dans
So
les années à
those
venir
who will
auront non seulement le marché malien,
relocate
le marché de
into
l'Afrique
Mali
de
will not
l'Ouest qui fait
have only
350
the
millions de
Malian
consommateurs, mais aussi tous les marchés africains.
consumers,
Les
but
perspectives sont
also
bonnes et nous
the
travaillons
African
au retour à
consumers.
l'ordre
So the
constitutionnel
prospects
normal dans un
are
maximum de
very
1 an et 2 ans.
positive.
Il est vrai qu'il y a des malentendus
It
avec
is
certains
true
partenaires
that
extérieurs,
we have some
essentiellement.
issues with foreign
les connaissez, c'est
partners,
les
and
pays
you know,
européens.
you're
Ça
aware
se comprend,
about
c'est
the
des
issues
luttes
we have with European
d'influence stratégique, mais
partners.
nous ne
This is
voulons
a
plus
strategic influence, but we
être
do not have, and we don't
prisonniers d'une
want
seule
to
alliance.
be
Nous voulons le
prisoners
multilatéralisme
of
sur tous les
one
plans.
alliance.
Sur le
We
plan
would
économique,
like
sur le
to
plan de la
become
défense, sur le plan de la sécurité, nous voulons avoir beaucoup de partenaires avec lesquels nous
multi,
travaillons. Nous ne voulons plus être sous la
partners.
coupe d'un
We
seul
don't want
pays
to be under the umbrella
qui
of
dicte ce
one
qu'il faut faire. Je
country
crois
that
qu'une
dictates
partie
what
des difficultés que
what
le Mali a
we
sur
need
le plan
to do.
international viennent de là.
And I
C'est des
think
choix que nous avons faits. Je pense
our
que nous allons
problems
les
come
assumer
from that,
avec le
and we
soutien
are
de notre
ready
peuple
to
et de nos amis. Voilà ce que je
take
voulais dire en
upfront
introduction. Merci
all of
bien.
that. So this is what I want to do. Our situation is very positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. I just want to do a time check. We have okay. All right. So let's pivot quickly to it's not often that we get to see sort of a full picture on a single country, but that can sometimes be intangible, I think, for individual investors. So, okay, just if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen businesses that your farm invests in evolve, and what's interesting for you about that, to these investors.
Yeah, so first, I think it's been interesting seeing how companies have responded to this sort of pandemic that we've been through. And I must say, for us overall, we've been positively impressed by the resilience of the companies, partly because for companies that were already leveraging technology, the whole pandemic meant that that investment proved to be quite useful. And a lot of portfolio companies a lot of the companies we invested in, benefited from that. I mean, we had one or two companies that were clearly depending on what you might call a lot of the outdoor activities. Like we have a company that is in the film, cinema, movie industry. But again, their response in terms of just being able to go into new things that help to deal with the adversity of the pandemic has been quite interesting. And that actually leads me to what I think is a real opportunity, which is basically how you leverage companies that want to do more, either regionally, geographically, as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and all the other regional trends that we're seeing. And that's something we're encouraging. Because particularly for companies that start from a place like Nigeria, which is a large country, the tendency is to want to be insular. But I think we're finding that there are benefits to diversification. And we're seeing that trend, and that's an important trend. We're also seeing the trend in terms of the convergence between businesses and what you might call their core sectors and technology and innovation. So again, we think that a lot of value is going to be created. And I was part of an earlier panel where one of the speakers, the CEO of Total Energies, was talking about how they no longer view themselves as an oil and gas company, but as a total energy company. Which means that they're looking at the how you bring all the elements together to produce the results. And this we're finding to be quite helpful in the sense that even businesses that started traditionally from, say, banking or insurance or healthcare or maybe education, in leveraging technology are finding that they're not only able to grow faster, but frankly, their valuations are better. And crucially, we're able to attract capital. So one of the things we're very focused on in terms of our going forward plans is, what we call that whole tech ecosystem and the interface between it and the various sectors of the economy, and how to use that to make sure that the businesses achieve superior growth and also attract the investment that is needed to reach not just the bottom of the pyramid, but frankly, the informal sector as Philip mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you. Philip, you've spent a lot of time around energy and energy access, and we know just like technology is critical to development, energy is right there at the base level of development. You talked to us a little bit about what you have learned over the last 25 years investing in energy and power in Africa. There's obviously a huge need for it, lots of obstacles. What do governments need to do in your view? What does the private sector need to do, and what can they do to try to accelerate energy access?
I think I could sum up what I've learned over the 25 years focused on infrastructure in one word, actually, and that is patience. The irony in many ways in Africa is one of the things that we are very short of is infrastructure and energy delivery systems. So every few years, there's a discussion about how we're just on the verge of an incredible growth particularly in the power sector. And I mean, obviously, Africa is not one country, varies massively, but you've got populations growing very fast relative to any other part of the world, and you've got infrastructure that is not growing as fast. And so there's all these predictions always about how many new power plants need to be built and should be built in order to keep up with demand. And yet they don't get built. And I come back to my home country, which is Nigeria. And Nigeria, so what I say to people, and they are surprised at first, is that we have our largest investment in the power sector. We supply, on a good day, about 10 or 11% of the electricity in Nigeria. And people go, "Oh, wow, that's very impressive. You must be very big." And when I say, well, it's a 500 megawatt power plant, so that means the total grid production of electricity in Nigeria is approximately 4,500, 5,000 megawatts for 200 million people. That is mind-blowing to most people. And I would love to say that has been growing, but it hasn't. If you were to go back 10 years, there was about 4,000 megawatts installed capacity. So the difficulty is that to grow electricity, you need a set of rules and you need a structure that encourages private sector investment, and that has not been as forthcoming as it should have been. So what has happened in the interim is that people do consume electricity, but that electricity is being consumed predominantly off-grid. So Nigeria is one of the few countries in the world where the proportion of electricity that is consumed that is off-grid is about 5 times what the on-grid is. So the vast majority of people in Nigeria self-generate electricity, and they're self-generating electricity at a cost of probably today about 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can imagine that if we can get major investment into grid-based power, what the difference it would make to the entire economy. But it requires patience. It requires good governance. One of the biggest challenges that we have, I think, across Africa is that we have got a situation where a lot of the talent has gone into the private sector, and not enough of the talent has gone into the public sector. And I think if I were to be a lot younger, I would encourage my friends and my colleagues and maybe even myself for more of us to go into the public sector. So I would say in the energy space, if you want to get involved in the energy space and you have patience and you pick the countries carefully, you look for the countries. I mean, we are very active in Senegal. Senegal has been a much easier market. We've just expanded into Mozambique. So we focused on countries where there's significant domestic gas, and we're focused on gas and solar. But it's a long journey. It's a very long journey. And in the meantime, as I mentioned before, we've made investments outside of energy and infrastructure, mainly focused on the consumer space, and a little bit in the tech space. And those investments generally have gone well, and they take a lot less time.
Thanks. I actually want to bring this back to your last point there on technology. In the last few minutes we have, if you look at the data that's out there, it's hard to believe for people that have been active in Africa for a while, but Africa has taken a lot less time than has Asia or Latin America to produce, let's say the first 5 unicorns, to raise capital from, of certain sizes. The technology space, with the numbers being thrown out there in terms of capital being raised for startups, I think last year would have been the first year that venture capital and technology raised more capital than, let's say, private equity. It's never happened before. So maybe just to throw that out there, how do you, to this audience that's sort of thinking about the African opportunity set, if you were to just focus in on technology within the spaces that you spend a lot of time on, and let's start with you, Philip, and maybe end with you, Okey, what should people here be thinking about? Can they deploy meaningful amounts of capital? Can they scale? Is it worth the risk, the real risk, not the perceived risk? Let's start with you, Philip.
So what I would say is there's a huge deficit of long-term capital in Africa. So that's the good news. And there's an enormous amount of activity, particularly in Nairobi and Lagos, in the tech space. So that's the good news. So there's a significant opportunity to deploy significant amounts of capital. I think the constraints will be there are good management teams, and there's some great management teams. But we've been fortunate in that there's a significant number of Africans abroad who are starting to move back. But management talent is going to be a constraint, and I would focus very, very hard on talent and who you're backing, not so much the opportunity, but who you're backing. I would also say, don't forget the macro. The number of times that I've seen incredibly good businesses that have fallen apart or have had problems because of the macro situation, whether they're exposed to foreign exchange rate risks or other risks, which if you focus just on the business and not on the macro, you'll lose sight of.
So I share your view that the opportunity is real, and the reason I think the opportunity is real is that if you look at what drives opportunity, particularly investment opportunity, to start from where Philip stopped, first you have to look at the underlying, capacity to absorb capital in terms of management teams, in terms of sectors, in terms of technology, in terms of stages of investment. The good news is that market has been developing for a while, maybe 10, 20 years, but then got a lot noticed because another force that has come into place as it's integrated into the global market in the sense that it's now part of the capital deployment coming into Africa. It's not just an African play, but it's actually part of a broader, let's say, tech play in the case of technology, just like private equity was becoming. And again, to tie it to Philip's point, one of the things we need to do better is even the macro situation and regulatory problems can disrupt the flow of capital. We've seen that in Nigeria, we've seen it in some other markets. So my view is that that to the extent that the technology, the tech play we're seeing continues to attract players into it, continues to attract players, not just locally, but even from the diaspora and capital, innovation is being fueled. Obviously, there'll be winners and losers. But this is true everywhere. And one of the things I believe is that it's very important that play is robust enough, to create enough returns that taken together, particularly when you get into the venture space where, as some people will make multiples of their capital, and there will be cases that will also go wrong, where capital can be lost. So for us, the final point I'll make is that there is also a connection, like I said earlier, between that and the broader sort of investment, particularly when you deal with private equity, and particularly when you deal with infrastructure, technology infrastructure. We've just invested in a company, WIOC, that provides connectivity, data centers all across Africa. And it's also absorbing a lot of capital, hundreds of millions of capital, which is needed to power a lot of these tech plays, because they do need the infrastructure to underpin it. So I think this combination of private sector and private capital, working with capital, local capital in Africa, with an enabling environment created by government, is actually the recipe, in my view, for development and for return. And that's something I pursued, as you know, when I served in government. My view is that the role of government should really be enabling. And if they enable, they solve the primary problem most governments have, which is creating employment, attracting capital, and growing the economy. But it's just that you have to have the humility to accept that your role is that of an enabler, not the player.
I think that's actually a good point on which to end our discussion. I see that we've run out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the audience. Thank you, Okey, Philip, and you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you all, and that brings us to the end of the Africa Forum sessions. Again, appreciate you all for coming. Deep appreciations to this panel and Richard for a very fascinating conversation. Thank you.